Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing great. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much, and I'm so glad you've joined me this evening for another fabulous story. So before we get started, go and get yourself something lovely to drink, like a hot cup of cocoa, or something very refreshing, especially if it's hot where you are. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, growing up I genuinely thought my mother was a naturally nervous, highly strung person, for it wasn't uncommon for her to get unduly upset and overawed about things. It was the little things that would set her off. Little did I know that my mother's fragile, overwrought emotions went back a long way. They were rooted in an ambiguously foggy childhood memory that haunted her every day of her life. For she had been clandestinely sitting on a secret that had been rudely eating her up for years and years from the inside out, like a tenacious little worm in an apple, with an insatiable appetite. My mother refused to watch anything on television that involved accidental death of any kind or murder. I just put it down to her being a very sensitive soul. I remember her getting incredibly distressed about a little girl who drowned in the family swimming pool a few doors down from where we lived. My mother took weeks to get over that tragic event, even though she didn't know the parents of the little girl that had drowned, or the girl herself. Yet she still took that fortuitous event very personally, and as hard as if it was her own child that had tragically died. My father would take her lovingly into his arms, assuring her that accidents happened to people. It was part of life, the rich tapestry, so to speak. But my mother was never convinced about any of that, as her argument was that all accidents could be avoided. If people drove more responsibly, car accidents wouldn't happen then. Children wouldn't be abducted if parents kept a closer watch on them. "Someone could have saved that poor child," she had said adamantly. "It's not fair. She should never have drowned. The mother should not have been so distracted. Then none of this would have ever occurred. If people would only pay attention. Why don't people pay attention? Then there would not be so many damn screw-ups in our lives." My father would say, "You don't even know these people who lost their child, sweetheart. Of course it's tragic what happened, but if you carry the weight of everybody else's grief on your shoulders, you're never going to be able to come up to draw breath yourself. You'll be drowned by your own despair. It's not healthy to think like this and take things so very personally. If you think about it, doctors in hospitals who see death and dying all the time, they have to become significantly detached towards all of this. Otherwise it would destroy them. They'd fall apart, be unable to focus on their jobs, wouldn't they? How can you save somebody else's life if you're having an emotional breakdown yourself?" "I understand where you're coming from, Peter," my mother would say, "but I can't help myself getting so upset about these dreadful things, like this drowning case. It is so desperately sad. Such a tragic waste of a young life." "I know, sweetheart, but you've just got to let it go." My father was the opposite to my mother in every way. He was a big, masculine, burly man with ponderous shoulders who was strong both physically and mentally, and agile as well. I genuinely believe some men love to rescue women who are vulnerable and insecure, like an injured wild animal found lying on the side of the road that needs to be taken care of, or it will surely die. It's like the masculine side of their character responds favourably to fragility of a very demure feminine woman who needs to be rescued, as men possess a naturally protective instinct, like my father does. My mother was that fragile woman that needed rescuing in every sense of the word. Even as a child, I surreptitiously considered my mother to be far more fragile than many of my dolls, and I even told my father as much. She really was like that fledgling that fell out of a nest that you want to wrap up in tissue paper very, very carefully and try desperately to nurture and bring back to health. I even remember my dad reading me a story once about a little princess who was so sensitive that she slept on a mattress with a pin under it, and despite all the upholstering of the mattress, she claimed to be pricked by that pin. I said to my dad, "Mummy would also feel the pin pricking her, just like the princess in the fairy tale did."
"You know what?" he said to me. "Shannon, I do believe you're absolutely right. Your mother is a very sensitive soul. Indeed, I worry about her a lot. If she's not careful, the distress that she brings on upon herself will be her greatest undoing."
"But why is she like that?" I'd asked my dad. "Why does she get so sad about everything?" My father, who was sitting on the end of the bed, having read me a bedtime story at the time, looked at me sorrowfully through his steely blue eyes and said,
"I'd be damned if I know. But there is something very bad that happened in your mother's life when she was a young girl that has made her into what she is today. But I wish to God I knew what it was that gets her down so much. Then we could help her, couldn't we? But your mother is so goddamn secretive. She refuses to talk to me about her childhood woes, and I suspect therein is where the trouble lies. I have tried to speak to your Aunt Eloise about the matter, and of course her parents, but they're unresponsive and disobliging, like closed books stuck together with superglue, that stubbornly refuse to cooperate with my requests. So, whatever is ailing your mother, they're not going to tell me, but I can see in their eyes something happened a long time ago, when your mother was young, to make her so delicate. Of course she's been to counselling, but nothing has helped her. Your mother is a very private, reticent person, and even the counsellor complained that she refuses to talk. You cannot help someone who doesn't want to be helped. That's the problem. You know what your mother's like. She's masterfully managed to keep all her emotions under lock and key, as if they're in a bank vault. I know there's something that has been troubling her for years, but how can I succeed in sucking blood out of a stone? The trouble is it's a bit like having a splinter in your foot. You can't remove it while it's stuck inside your skin. The discomfort just doesn't go away. I so want to remove your mother's splinter, and when we do that, she'll be a lot happier.
But can't you do it, Daddy? Because I want Mummy to be happier.
We'll have to try, won't we?
My father had been a firefighter for many long years. He had saved so many people from being incinerated by angry house fires. I know you shouldn't put anyone on a pedestal and make them a superhero, but my dad was my superhero, in every single sense of the word. Courage and bravery were his middle names. Having him around would always make me feel safe, as if the big bad world could never hurt me, for my dad would rescue me from anything bad that could ultimately happen in my life. Aside from all that, my father's innate protective instincts that were burnt in his DNA like an indelible tattoo meant that he enjoyed rescuing people and animals alike, and I loved him all the more for it. By all accounts, our 2 domesticated tabby cats that we had adopted in our home were the progeny of my father's rescue projects. They were both saved from a burning semi-detached house, where the elderly couple had tragically died as a result of accidentally leaving a chip pan on the hob. For some reason they had gone to sleep, completely forgetting about the chips on the cooker. It would seem in seconds the blazing obstreperous inferno had got manically out of control. The couple's 2 cats had miraculously escaped the flames with singed fur, but nothing more physically life-threatening had occurred. Both cats were given a clean bill of health by the vet. Let's not kid, the fortuitous events had traumatized them significantly. My father had brought them home with him. For 1 week they were so terrified they remained hidden under my parents' bed, refusing to leave their safe sanctuary. My dad would feed them under the bed with pieces of chicken and water, and even place a litter tray there, until finally they had the courage to come out. The shock of the fire had clearly left an indelible, harrowing imprint on their lives that could not be easily expunged. And even when we enjoyed a crackling fire in winter as a family in our living room, our cats would keep a safe distance, eyeing those orange flames very suspiciously. My father called one of our cats Smoky, the other Firefly, because of how they'd been found. They became much-loved members of our family household. They followed my mother around wherever she went, lying on her lap, offering her comfort, for they could sense that she, too, was broken. We also had a one-legged dog called Dumpy. She was found in a plastic bag, thrown in a dumpster, possibly because she'd been born with one leg missing, and some very twisted individual thought she wasn't worth saving, and had callously tipped her into a bin, throwing her into the dumpster, as if she was as useless as a sack of old potato peelings that had absolutely no purpose. Fortunately, an old lady had rescued Dumpy from her claustrophobic plastic confinement. When disposing of her refuse, she heard a whimpering sound coming from the neighbour's dumpster. That was when she found a bundle of fur and a pair of frightened puppy dog eyes staring up at her inside a bin bag. The old lady believed someone had randomly selected a bin on her street, dumping little Dumpy into the bin, so the perpetrator would never be found. She phoned my dad at once, as she knew he was a firefighter and would know what to do about the poor puppy. My father insisted on adopting Dumpy, so the dog was practically joined to my father's hip. Animals know when you save their lives, and Dumpy knew unequivocally he'd been spared from a cruel, grisly fate, for he wouldn't have lasted very long in that plastic bag. I'm not sure what breed of dog Dumpy actually was, but he definitely had some Irish wolfhound in him. He grew to be very large, a docile, affectionate dog, who became another precious member of our family. My father would say,
"Who in their right mind would throw out a dog like Dumpy into a dumpster? He's even more precious just because he has got 3 legs. What the heck is wrong with people?"
My father would go to the fish shop in town, buying fish for our pond. He chose the ones that were missing an eye or had a growth on their fin. The fish the shop would lightly discard, for such was his generous nature. I think you could say my idiosyncratic story begins when my grandparents had downsized from a large house in Los Angeles to a small condo. So they gave my mother boxes and boxes of their much-treasured books that they could not bear to give away to a charity shop or to throw out, because some of those books were collector's items. My parents, who were devoted book lovers and adored reading, decided to convert one of the rooms in our home into a library and hired a professional carpenter for the job. He created a stunning, all-expansive, airy room that was seamlessly fitted with oakwood shelves, some that reached up to the ceiling, that could only be accessed by an oakwood ladder. The shelves boasted an impressive collection of high-quality books, some that I understand were first editions, worth a considerable amount of money. Those books were individualistically stored in a special glass cabinet on the insistence of my grandmother, who wanted them to be kept in very special, pristine condition. We were not allowed to handle them without wearing gloves, as just damaging a page with our fingers would instantly devalue the book. It would seem both my parents were very big on reading when I was growing up. I remember them reading hundreds and hundreds of books. I think my mother thoroughly enjoyed reading. It was a natural tranquilizer and escapism for her. I think the fictitious world of books suited my mother better than the real world in many regards. As many things that life throws at you can potentially go badly wrong, but in a book you have a measure of control. If you didn't like the way the story was going, you could ultimately abandon it and start yet another. You could remind yourself that it wasn't real, if it emotionally distressed you in any way. In the world of fiction, there was always a way out, but in life, when you got embroiled in a real-life dramatic event, from whom could you run? I hasten to say my mother only read books that guaranteed happy endings, for if an ending in a book upset her, even if it was spurious, my mother would lose her calm and become agitated and overwrought. I remember on one rainy day, I was climbing up the bookshelves industriously, on an intrepid search for a book to read, I found an old burgundy hardback book called Grimm's Fairy Tales. Like all my grandmother's books, it too was in pristine condition, and the print in the book looked to be like an old-fashioned italic. I curiously brought it down to read. I was about 12 years old at the time, very inquisitive. For some reason the old book got my attention. It drew me to it like iron filings to a magnet, in a way that I cannot explain. I often wondered if I was meant to find it. When I opened the large hardback book, the pages virtually cracked, they were so old. And to my surprise, 4 black and white photographs fell out of its pages, floating onto the ground, landing at my feet. I picked them up, studying the photographs closely, and realizing they were photographs of my mother with her sister Eloise when they were little girls. They were standing by a large body of water that looked to be a silvery lake, but in all the photographs they looked as if they were between the ages of 8 to 10, although I couldn't be sure. It looked like one of the girls in the photograph had been deliberately torn out of the picture, and I was confounded by this enigmatic peculiarity, and my natural inquisitive curiosity was spiked. Why would anybody of sound, reasonable mind tear out a young girl's image from a photograph? I've heard of spurned lovers before, of course, tearing out a picture of a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and I can understand that. But why would anyone want to eliminate the picture of an innocent girl from a photograph? What was so bad about this young girl that you'd want to eliminate her memory, as if she'd never existed, as if you wanted to wipe her away, as furiously as the bird poop on your windscreen window? I remember running eagerly into the kitchen, my heart aflutter with an ebullient keenness to find answers. At the time my mother was rolling out a pastry lid for the chicken pot pie she was making for our dinner. She was focused on the job at hand. My mother liked to get fully absorbed by any activity she indulged in, like cooking, reading or art, so that she could let go of the things that entertained all her anxiety. "Look what I found, Mum," I said. My mother continued to roll the pastry vigorously. She seemed irritated by my obtrusive intrusion. She said to me, "Not now, Shannon. Show me later. I'm very busy. I need to get dinner on. I'm running late already." "It's 4 photographs of you with Aunt Eloise when you were kids. Why did you tear out the other person in the picture? She's only a little girl, but in all these 4 photographs her image has been torn out. Do you know why? Why would anybody do such a mean, spiteful thing? Who is she anyway?" My mother looked up at me from the pastry she was rolling rather gingerly, along with the photographs I was holding up in my hand for her to see. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously as they swept over the photographs in my hand. Her face grew as dark as a thundercloud. Her whole body trembled, and for her to react like this over 4 photographs from her childhood rarely set for me the cat among the pigeons, for she was visibly disturbed, although she tried to hide it well. But I was not fooled. "Where did you get those photographs from, Shannon?" she growled, snatching the pictures out of my hands spiritedly. She glanced down briefly at the photographs, her face growing so purple. "I found them in an old Grimm's fairy tale book," I told her. "It's got italic writing, it's a purple book, and the pictures are so lovely. Who is the person that's torn out of the photograph? Why would you tear her picture out?" "No one is torn out of the photograph. I cannot think what you're talking about, Shannon," said my mother, grabbing the photographs from my startled hands, tearing them up into tiny pieces. She tossed them directly into the bin. "As I keep telling you, there is no one in the photograph. It is a picture of me with your Aunt Eloise when we were little. There is no one else in that photograph. You are mistaken." But I wasn't fooled by her denial. I stared at her in abject disbelief, unable to comprehend her strange reaction. Why was she lying? Why would she tear up 4 perfectly good pictures from her past, as if they meant absolutely nothing? Who did that? My mother was extraordinarily defensive. There was no doubt in my mind that the photographs had distinctly ruffled her feathers. She wiped her floury hands on her apron, returning to her rolling pin and pastry, and in a very stern tone of voice she said to me obsequiously, "Now will you kindly go up to your bedroom, Shannon, and finish your homework for me?" My mother was rattled. The photographs had definitely triggered some kind of haunting memory for her, that she'd been masterfully hiding away in the attic of her mind, buried beneath shadowy cobwebs and dust blankets of denial. My bringing them out in the light of day had been like throwing petrol onto a fire that she wanted to put out at once. "Why did you tear those photographs up, Mum? They were perfectly good. They were in great condition. Why did you do that? Those pictures were from your childhood. Don't they mean anything to you at all? And who is the girl in the picture with you and Aunt Eloise? Why is her image torn out of the photographs? That's such a horrible thing to do, to obliterate someone's memory like that. It's only a girl like you and your sister. Why would you do that to a photograph?" "Why don't you listen, Shannon, to me? When I talk to you, have you got a severe hearing impediment that needs addressing? As I keep telling you, there is no one in that photograph. I am in those pictures with Aunt Eloise. I think I would know, don't you? I was there. You weren't," said my mother, glaring at me with round, defiant eyes. "Don't keep asking questions. It's incredibly annoying. You're always poking your nose into other people's business and interfering. Now would you kindly leave me alone to get the dinner started?" My mother was not happy that I had found the photographs, and was enigmatically evasive about the questions I was asking her. I knew she was clandestinely hiding something from me, and deliberately lying about the young girl in the picture. But the question was, why? Why would she do that? "Did you not hear what I was saying, Shannon?" my mother snapped. "I told you to go to your room now, to finish your homework at once. What are you waiting for? Why are you just standing there staring at me with your mouth agog?" "But I've done my homework, Mum. I told you I finished it an hour ago." A pugnacious frown materialized on my mother's contorted face, that was normally as smooth and flawless as a peach. Now it was puckered up with a capricious frustration. She looked like a road map. She glared at me furiously through her blue eyes, that seemed to be burning with indignation. She waved her rolling pin at me frenziedly, as if she'd seriously like to wallop me with it, as if I was an annoying mosquito that was buzzing around her that she seriously wanted to swat. "Well then, go over it again, will you? Check you haven't made some serious mistakes." My mother's face had grown from a lily white to a cherry red, which gave me pause for thought. "What are you waiting for, Shannon? Go to your room now. I'll call you when dinner is served." I threw up my arms in exasperation. All right, Mum, I'm going. Keep your hair on, will you?" I said, waving my arms up in mock surrender. There was something she was not telling me. I knew if I persisted asking my mother awkward questions, I would make her grievously upset, so the subject was closed. In truth, I longed to find out answers to the mysterious questions that whirled around my head like the washing in a cycle. Somewhere deep down in my gut, I knew that these photographs were the clue as to why my mother was such a nervous person, who was predisposed to become very upset over the tiniest things. 1 year later, I was in the kitchen, sitting at the breakfast nook, shelling peas. My aunt was tossing a salad dressing into a very large salad bowl, while my mother was brushing the ribs with more sticky sauce, lining them up for the grill. They had cooked on both sides, but she wanted to brown them a little more so that the meat was more caramelized. The radio was throwing out 80s hits, and my mother was humming away happily to herself. The atmosphere in the kitchen was very congenial, and my Aunt Eloise and my mother had been laughing a lot. My mother thoroughly enjoyed having her sister, Aunt Eloise, around to stay for the occasional weekend with us. They were reasonably close. Aunt Eloise was a gregarious, easygoing, light-hearted woman who never took life too seriously. She wore her heart on her sleeve. She didn't get apprehensive or anxious like my mother did. Somehow when she was around, she diffused my mother's angst, as if waving a magic wand over her, and the brewing storms of my mother's trepidation would almost instantly fade, which made my aunt's presence in our home better than Xanax. Aunt Eloise was spending the weekend with us and her 4-year-old daughter Gracie, whom was such an adorable child. Her husband was away in Dubai, working on a 6-month contract, and she was used to spending extended periods of time on her own. Aunt Eloise hated Dubai with a passion. She claimed the heat was insufferable there, describing it as like a Turkish bath or a sauna, which was why reluctantly she chose to remain in San Diego. And in the beginning the long drawn-out separation was tough for my aunt, but somehow she and her husband Simon made it work, and would speak to each other for hours in the evening. "I think I need to tell you something, Joe," she said to my mother. "I've been meaning to tell you, so I'm going to come out straight with it. I'm afraid I'm not sure you're going to react very favourably to what I'm going to tell you." "Why don't I like the sound of that? It sounds rather ominous. You better tell me what it is. I don't want to be kept in suspense. You know what I'm like. I'll be worrying about it if you don't tell me." "Well, I've bought the old place in Maine. You know the one, Blue Gables Cottage by the lake, that Mum and Dad used to own. We used to spend our summer holidays there when we were girls. It recently came on the market. I couldn't resist buying it. I took Simon to see it when he was out from Dubai. He thought the place was absolutely perfect for us. It's in relatively good nick, you know. Right now I've got a building contractor there, giving the house a much-needed makeover, a brush of paint and some general maintenance repairs. Then it'll be as good as new for us to move into." My mother stopped what she was doing, and her face literally froze. I don't think I've ever seen my mother become so pale before. She looked as white as a ghost, her eyes almost glazed over like a dead fish. The former congenial atmosphere in the kitchen dissipated like the steam from a kettle, as my mother awkwardly chewed her lip, and the silence seemed deafening as my mother absorbed the full impact of my aunt's words, as if she'd been hit grievously hard in the groin with a tennis ball. Finally she spoke, her words almost dropping to a raspy whisper. "You what?" she asked. "Say that again." "You heard," said my aunt. "I told you. I've bought Blue Gables Cottage in Maine. You know the one." It was as if my aunt's seemingly benign words had stung my mother cruelly, like a great big Portuguese man of war. The tray she was carrying with the spare ribs fell onto the kitchen floor. The sticky juices splattered everywhere. It was an unsightly mess. "Look what you've made me do," she growled at my aunt. "Look at this god-awful mess, and this is all your fault. You're to blame for this. Now we cannot have ribs for lunch. Look what you've done. I'll have to grill some chicken breasts instead. What a dreadful mess. We can't eat any of this stuff. It's landed on the floor. It's inedible. It's now completely contaminated with germs. It's unsanitary. We can't possibly eat this for lunch. Look what you've done. You made me do this." My aunt rolled her eyes. "I think you did that. That wasn't me, Joe," she said. Dumpy, on seeing the spare ribs on the kitchen floor, with his dark brown hopeful eyes and his long pink tongue, darted eagerly forwards, his tail wagging. He was enthusiastic about cleaning the sticky mess on the floor for us, and my mother gestured him to do just that. "It's all yours, Dumpy. You can eat it," she told the delighted dog, who thought his Christmases had all come at once. While Dumpy ate with a vigorous, insatiable enthusiasm, I confiscated all the bones, so that Dumpy could feast on the meat and juices without chewing the bones. I thought rib bones might be problematic for a dog's ingestion. I was staring at my mother's pained expression in abject astonishment. It was not like her to be so ungainly and clumsy, but Aunt Eloise's news had startled her so much that I'd physically seen the oven tray of ribs slipping out of her fingers like butter. Her voice sounded hoarse when she spoke again, as if she'd been suffering from laryngitis and had completely lost her voice. "Why would you do that, Eloise? Buy Blue Gables? How could you do that? Are you completely insane? Why would you want to go back to Maine? Why?" "Look, Joe, please don't get so upset. It's ridiculous. You need to calm down. You really are being very, very overdramatic about this. I love that place in Maine. We have so many treasured memories from that gorgeous place. I also enjoy going there. I'm so sorry you don't like it, but it's the way it is. When the place came on the market, I couldn't resist going to see it again with Simon. To tell you the truth, I did not intend to buy it. But I fell in love with it all over again, just like Mum and Dad did all those years ago when they saw the place for the very first time. It brought back so many awesome memories for me. Of course, they're not all good memories, I appreciate that. But the good memories, they so override the bad ones. Don't you see that? No, I don't. So you're going to leave San Diego, are you? And go and live in Maine? What do Mum and Dad say about that? She asked in disgust. That's right, I am, with Simon. You know, he's working in Dubai all the time. We can pretty much live where we like now. I can do my script writing there. I've got my own office for those purposes. It's going to be wonderful for us. Please be happy for me, Joe. I don't understand why you would do this, Eloise, said my mother, who was beginning to sound like a broken record. I could swear my mother was almost stamping her foot indignantly, like a petulant spoilt brat, who hadn't got her own way. Why was she not happy for Aunt Eloise? My father had entered the kitchen.
I heard the crashing sound. What on earth happened? Did something break? What was all the commotion about?
My father's eyes observed the remnants of sticky sauce on the floor that was being licked up appreciatively by a very satisfied-looking dumpy.
Mama dropped the spare ribs on the kitchen floor by accident, Dad. She's upset because Aunt Eloise has brought their old family cottage in Maine. Blue Gables, I believe the name is.
My father looked from Aunt Eloise back to his wife.
Why would you be upset, sweetheart? It sounds quite lovely that your sister has brought an old childhood home. Why would that trouble you?
I just think it's a very bad idea, that's all. Everyone knows you shouldn't look back to the past. How many people do you know go back to their old hometowns and buy the old house they lived in as children? It's nonsensical. It's going backwards, that's what I call it. It's not moving forwards, is it?
Well, what's wrong with being wistfully nostalgic? Said my father. I think it's perfectly lovely. Maine is a wonderful part of the world to reside. If Eloise has great memories living in her childhood home, why can't she go back there and enjoy the place again, to make new memories with her husband Simon and little Gracie? Many people live in family homes for generations. They never consider buying another house, do they?
You have no idea what you're talking about, Pete. You have no clue, so keep your butt outside my business. If you must know, it wasn't our permanent residence, my mother corrected. It was a holiday property. For the record, Maine is not lovely, said my mother. There's lots of mosquitoes there. The weather can be very grey and dreary at times. It's overcast for most of the time there. So there we are. That's the end of part 1 of our story. Methinks our little secret regarding why Mother is so uptight is in Maine, so we'll find out all about that. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.